Jung, Reality of the Soul.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into some fascinating stuff today. An excerpt from Carl Jung's Reality of the Soul.
Yeah, we're going to unpack how people throughout history have looked at this whole idea of the soul.
From like ancient beliefs to, how we see it now with modern psychology and everything in between. That's a lot to unpack, but trust me, it's packed with really interesting insights.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how these ideas have evolved,
Yeah.
Like, we've gone from ancient civilizations that totally embraced the soul.
Right. It was just a given.
Exactly. To a time when material science kind of took center stage in the soul, well, it got pushed aside a bit.
It's wild how that happened. Jung himself found it kind of strange. Like, even the big thinkers of the 19th century just kind of went with it. This huge shift in how we think about ourselves, and no one really batted an eye. It makes you wonder what could cause that.
Well, Jung thought it was this thing he called the spirit of the age, or Zeitgeist. It's like this invisible current that shapes the way people think in a particular period.
Almost like an intellectual trend, but deeper than that.
Exactly. And it's still relevant to us today. Think about it. What are some of those ideas everyone just accepts as truth today? Have we really stopped to examine them? That's the thing about the Zeitgeist. It makes us question everything.
And if you think about it, that shift to this materialist view, it wasn't necessarily based on some huge scientific breakthrough.
Right.
It was almost like a knee-jerk reaction to centuries of spiritual thought, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, like a pendulum swinging too far in the other direction.
And that kind of leaves modern psychology in this weird spot. Because how do you study the soul scientifically?
Well, you can look at how language has changed. The word soul itself, it comes from old words that meant movement, breath, life force. It was about the very essence of being alive.
It's like looking back in time through language.
Yeah.
You can almost feel how differently they understood the world back then. Very different from just seeing everything as, purely material.
And this is where Jung challenges that whole materialist view. He says both spirit and matter, in the end, they're just symbols, right? Representations of something we don't fully understand.
So if we're living in a world obsessed with what we can see and touch and measure, how does Jung define the soul? If it's not a thing, then what is it?
He describes it as existing outside of time and space. Hard to wrap your head around, I know. But he's basically saying it was there before our conscious selves, our sense of I, and it'll be there after.
Okay, so if our sense of self, that we feel, if that's just a small part of something much bigger, it really changes how you look at reality, right?
It really does.
And then he talks about how even physical sensations, like pain, are experienced through our psyche.
It's like our psyche is the lens we experience everything through.
Which kind of flips the whole materialist view on its head, right? Like, maybe the physical world isn't so primary after all.
Exactly. If everything we perceive is filtered through our psyche, what does that mean about reality as we know it? It's a pretty big question, and it gets to the heart of why Jung's work is still so relevant.
So we've talked about this shift toward a material understanding of the world and how Jung sees the soul as something beyond the physical. But how does this invisible soul show itself to us? What are its fingerprints on our everyday lives?
Well, Jung uses this really powerful image. He talks about someone living on earthquake ground. They go about their day, totally unaware that everything beneath them could shift at any moment.
And that's like our unconscious.
You got it.
Yeah.
We're mostly unaware of this vast unconscious realm, but it's always there. And just like an earthquake, it can erupt into our conscious experience when we least expect it, often in surprising ways. Have you ever had an experience, maybe a dream, that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself or the world?
Dreams, right. Talk about shaking things up. But if the soul is this hidden force, how do we even begin to understand it? How do we tap into that?
That's a question people have been asking for centuries. And Jung, he is not alone here, but he really believed that to understand the soul, you have to look at the things that shake us out of our normal routines. Dreams, intuition, even those moments in life that really test us.
Yeah.
Those perils of the soul, as some cultures call them.
Which reminds me, we want to talk about Paracelsus today. What a character. This guy was a true Renaissance man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Medicine, alchemy, astrology, you name it, he was into it.
Oh yeah, Paracelsus, he's a great example of someone who is always pushing the boundaries, always asking questions, going beyond what everyone else accepted as truth. He was a doctor, sure, but he was also an alchemist, an astrologer, a real polymath. He wasn't afraid to challenge the medical establishment of his time.
And just like Jung, he was fascinated by those hidden forces that shape our lives. He saw the human being as a microcosm, this tiny reflection of the entire universe governed by those same forces and energies.
And that's a key connection between Jung and Paracelsus, this idea that everything is connected. Paracelsus believed that if we could understand the principles that govern nature, we could unlock the secrets to healing ourselves. He didn't just see the body as this machine that needed fixing. He saw it as part of this bigger, interconnected cosmos.
Yeah, his whole approach to medicine was totally radical back then. He challenged those old medical theories that had been around for centuries. Instead, he was all about a more holistic view, one that considered the whole person, mind, body, and spirit.
He was all about observation, about trusting your own experience instead of blindly following tradition. He wasn't afraid to try new things, and he emphasized treating the whole person, not just the physical symptoms. Kind of like how Jung believed that true healing has to address the root causes of suffering, which often means looking at the unconscious.
And Paracelsus was really into the unconscious, wasn't he? He saw dreams as this valuable tool for understanding our inner lives. He even considered himself a kind of shaman, a healer who could access those hidden parts of the psyche.
He really did. He truly believed that the unconscious could guide us and heal us. He even challenged the common belief back then by saying that illness wasn't always caused by physical things, but by imbalances in the psyche. Again, that connection between our inner and outer worlds.
And we can't forget, Paracelsus was a bit of a rebel. He wasn't afraid to challenge authority, even if it got him into trouble.
Oh yeah, he definitely ruffled some feathers. He was outspoken, controversial even. But that's how it goes when you challenge the status quo, right? And that's something else he shared with Jung, that willingness to go against the grain, to question everything, even if it meant facing criticism. They both stayed true to their belief in exploring the unseen parts of what it means to be human.
One thing that always stood out to me about Paracelsus was his idea of the inner physician. It's this idea that we all have the power to heal ourselves.
Exactly. It's not all about external cures and treatments. Both Jung and Paracelsus, they remind us to look within, to tap into our own inner wisdom. It's about cultivating that relationship with our unconscious. And for Paracelsus, that meant embracing all parts of ourselves, even the hidden stuff.
And he definitely had a wild side. I mean, the stories about this guy. Apparently, he liked his wine a bit too much and wasn't afraid to stir up a little trouble. People even accused him of being a magician.
There were definitely some rumors going around about him. Yeah, he was a colorful character. But, Jung might even say that those shadow elements, as he called them, make Paracelsus even more interesting. Because it shows us that wholeness isn't about being perfect. It's about embracing all those different parts of ourselves, even the ones we try to hide.
It's like that Jung quote. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We have to face those hidden parts of ourselves instead of pretending they aren't there.
That's it, exactly. True wholeness comes from integrating everything, not just the good stuff.
So, for our listener, what's the big takeaway here? Why should we care about this idea of the soul today, especially in our modern world?
It's a good question. It's easy to dismiss all this as some sort of esoteric stuff that has nothing to do with our modern lives, especially with how much science has advanced. But I think both Jung and Paracelsus offer something that we've lost sight of, a different way of looking at ourselves and the world. They're asking us to look beyond what we can see and touch, to recognize that there's more to us than just our egos.
It's about acknowledging that science, while amazing, doesn't have all the answers, especially when it comes to things like consciousness, intuition, and the human psyche.
Absolutely. This isn't about rejecting science. It's about understanding that there are other ways of knowing, other things that influence our experiences that science can't fully explain. Things like creativity, intuition, and the power of the human spirit.
It's about recognizing that there's more to life than just the physical world, that there are these unseen forces that shape us both individually and as a society.
It's about realizing that we're all connected in ways we can't even fully grasp. And that's a really powerful idea, I think a hopeful one too.
It's like we're all these tiny threads woven into something
Yeah.
much bigger, right?
Mhm.
But then, if we're so connected, why does it feel like modern life is all about being disconnected?
Yeah, that's something Jung talked about a lot. He saw this soullessness in modern life, this emptiness and loneliness that he thought came from being so focused on stuff, on technology, on achieving things in the outside world. We've basically created a world where it's easy to lose touch with ourselves, with each other, and with nature.
There's so much noise, so much going on all the time, that it's hard to hear that inner voice.
Exactly. And Jung really believed that this disconnect from our soul, it's at the root of so much suffering. The anxiety, the depression, that feeling of being lost. It's all connected to neglecting that deeper part of ourselves.
So if being disconnected is the problem, what's the solution? How do we get back to that feeling of wholeness, of being connected to something bigger than ourselves?
Yeah. Jung believed the key is reconnecting with that soul, and he saw exploring the unconscious as a big part of that. It's about paying attention to those whispers from within, our dreams, our gut feelings, even those emotions we try to bury deep down.
Even those shadow parts of ourselves we were just talking about, the parts we don't want to look at.
Especially those parts. It's not always easy, Facing those shadows can be tough, even painful sometimes. But Jung, he truly believed that it's in those dark corners where we hide things that we find the greatest potential for growth.
So instead of being afraid of those shadow parts, we should see them as a source of strength and wisdom.
Exactly. It's about bringing those parts into the light, integrating them so we can become more whole, more ourselves.
And he talked a lot about dreams, didn't he? Like they were a direct line to the unconscious.
He did. He encouraged his patients to keep dream journals, to really dive into the symbols and emotions that came up. He thought dreams were the soul's way of communicating with us.
But dreams can be so hard to understand. It's like a whole other language. How do you even begin to figure them out?
It takes time. It's like learning any new language. You have to be patient with yourself. Jung believed the things we see in dreams, they have personal meaning. They're usually reflections of our waking lives, our fears, our hopes, the things we haven't dealt with yet. By looking for those recurring themes, those strong emotions that come up, we can start to understand what our dreams are trying to tell us.
So for someone listening who's really interested in all this and wants to explore their own soul, where do they start?
Start by paying attention. Notice what's going on inside. What are some of the patterns in your life? What are you drawn to? What scares you? What brings you joy? These are all clues.
It's about really tuning in, being present with those quiet, subtle things we usually miss.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask for help. A therapist who understands Jung's work can be a great guide. Reading Jung's books directly can be really eye-opening too, even though they can be a little dense. But most of all, approach this with an open mind, with curiosity. Be kind to yourself. It's a journey.
A lifelong journey. This whole idea of exploring the soul, of understanding who we really are, it never really ends, does it?
It doesn't, but it's a journey worth taking. Because in discovering ourselves in those deepest parts of who we are, we discover our connection to something much greater than ourselves. We connect to the very essence of life itself. And that's a really beautiful thing.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the reality of the soul, and we'll leave you with this. If it's true what Jung said, that it's not armies or empires, but individuals who shape the course of history, well, that makes you, the listener, pretty important. It means you have the power to make a difference, to leave your mark on the world. And maybe, just maybe, this exploration of the soul, while deeply personal, is what will ultimately lead to a better world for everyone.